Edmonton City Council has legalized Uber. When is this going to happen in Toronto?
Well, obviously the challenge in front of us here is to bring forward a bylaw and then have it passed. And those are sort of two different challenges. But we're working very hard to have something brought forward this winter by way of a bylaw to be put in front of the City Council. And I would just, commend and point to Edmonton as a way of dealing with this. That is what we're trying to do here in Toronto. And we have been on a timetable about 2 months behind them all the way through. Like, they actually saw a draft bylaw a couple of months ago. Last night they passed it, or yesterday. And so I hope we're on the same timetable. And I have said all along, what we are trying to do here is exactly what they have done, which is to fashion a bylaw that achieves a balance, difficult as it may be, between making sure that Uber is properly and safely and effectively regulated, and making sure that the regulations that apply to taxi cabs and taxi cab drivers are equitable and fair relative to what's imposed on Uber. And they've come up with one answer to that in Edmonton, which we can learn from. We've been in consultation with them. You won't be surprised to know throughout this period, including a meeting I had right here in this office with the Mayor of Edmonton. And so we'll continue to be. But our objective remains the same, to bring forward as soon as possible a bylaw that can be approved by the City Council that regulates Uber and makes no mistake about the fact they are going to be subject to fair and equitable requirements on insurance and safety and other matters like that, and at the same time makes more fair and equitable to taxi drivers the regulations that apply to them going forward. That remains our objective.
Would that bylaw include a cap on the number of vehicles that can be used in that sort of Uber taxi style vehicles for hire?
I can't answer that question because I haven't seen it. I haven't even had an update on kind of what's in the draft, but I can only tell you that all the different kinds of things, you've seen some unique features of the Edmonton bylaw that, for example, includes a minimum fare that applies to everybody. So, and I think it's $3.25, that everybody starts with that, Uber, taxi, or otherwise. And, so there's some features like that, and all I can say is that as these discussions go on, as Tracy Cook does her work with her officials, that, these are all things that get added into the mix. I will say that, to my knowledge, one thing I am aware of is that this thing is far enough along that they will begin some consultations with industry stakeholders in the next very short period of time, perhaps a week or so. And in Edmonton, they have a different legislative process where they have 3 readings of a bylaw, like first reading, second reading, third reading, taking place at different times. I think we're actually at the stage where, now that we're consulting with stakeholders very shortly, it's like a first reading. And so we're going to begin to share the results of her work with people to consult them and say, well, so what do you think of this idea? What do you think of that idea? But I honestly can't answer your question as to whether that's part of what they're thinking about or not.
A couple more.
I want to say one more thing just on that question of Uber before we move on to something else, which you might. I have said before, and I just want to emphasize this again, and I think you know that I've said it, and I'm not trying to bore you, but I'm just trying to make sure you understand. On the matter of an injunction, which, as you know, is a current matter because it was discussed at a committee the other day, we have been relying from the end of the last injunction up until today and going forward on the advice of our lawyers with respect to the question of if and when we should commence another injunction proceeding. And our lawyers have been looking at that continuously since that time. And I guess I could be candid in saying this, that if I had to rely for advice as the mayor, and I'm one member of City Council, on Councillor Jim Karagiannis as to what he thinks of the timing of that based on considerations he takes into account, which may have more to do with the realm of politics than law, or our lawyers who are there all the time as objective public servants, professional public servants, to make that decision, I'll pick our lawyers. And they are continuously advising on this. I'm continuously asking about it. I will be briefed again before the week is out on this matter, but they will help us to decide when and if we should seek an injunction. The last thing we can afford to do is to spend time and money seeking an injunction like this and lose again. This would substantially weaken our position to be able to move forward and deal effectively with Uber, and I don't want to weaken our position. And one final part, go ahead, Mark.
Well, what of the notion that there are members of the cab industry who have once again offered threats that if an injunction isn't pursued, that...
Well, I was asked about this the other day only by one media outlet because I happened to be on there live when the matter came up, and I'll answer it again and simply say this. I think it would be a big mistake in judgment for them to do that, both from the standpoint of advancing their own case. I don't think it's going to advance the drafting of the bylaw or the consideration of the advice with respect to seeking an injunction by 1 minute, or help any cab driver to earn a better living for them to do that kind of a protest, which will potentially give the city a bit of a black eye during a time when we should be shining across North America and around the world. And so I would hope that those in the industry who do have the power to stop this, people will say they have nothing to do with it, they're not involved, those people could stop this from happening or make sure it didn't happen, and I'd be quite prepared to give them full credit and full marks if they do that. I think it would be a very unwise thing to do, both because it won't achieve anything except perhaps to anger people around the city and give Toronto a bad reputation, and it won't achieve anything in terms of moving the issue forward. So I have no idea about why anybody would want to do this.